Good morning. I've got Esther chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, except for verse 6. These events happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. At that time, Xerxes ruled his empire from his royal throne at the fortress of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and nobles of the provinces. The celebration lasted 180 days, a tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. When it was all over, the king gave a banquet for all the people, from the greatest to the least, who were in the fortress of Susa. It lasted for 7 days and was held in the courtyard of the palace garden. Drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs, and there was an abundance of royal wine reflecting the king's generosity. By the edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. At the same time, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes.
So a little bit of a truckload to read there. Esther after Easter. Okay, I'll have to stop saying it now because we're going to be well into Esther as we talk. It is one of the most unusual books in our Bible, as you'll see in a number of ways. The book of Esther is found if you go to Psalms and hang a left, which would be that way for you looking at me, you'll find Esther. It's Esther, Job, then the book of Psalms. So you can find it easily and quickly now, right? That was my plan anyway. So for some background for Esther, it comes in an interesting spot. You can remember the kingdom role of King David and then his son Solomon. Shortly after they had their reigns, the people of Israel had some conflicts brewing. The 12 tribes actually split, not evenly so. 10 tribes took the north, they were called Israel, and 2 tribes took the south, they were called Judah, and they were made up of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin as well. And I think I have a picture on the map there. You can see how the kingdom's divided. You'll also see they're way on the east side, almost to Amman there. And so Israel is bigger geographically, but of course, in just a little bit, they would be conquered. And I forgot my pointer. Oh, well, we'll just have to wait. So at a certain point, the Assyrians from the east, not too far from Babylon, the Assyrians came over and surrounded and wiped out city after city of the northern tribe. They either killed or took into captivity all the people from the nation of Israel in the north. Shortly after that, the Assyrians then went down to the south, and they were conquering all the cities there, and the same thing. And it's a very interesting story to me, someday we'll cover it with Hezekiah. They came and with almost 200,000 men, soldiers, surrounded the city of Jerusalem. And the city was packed with refugees from everywhere. It was packed. And Hezekiah knew they were in trouble. There was no way they could stop the Assyrians, who were, by the way, very, very, they were just a rough crowd, let's say that. They were extremely rough. And that night, the Lord wiped out like 98% of the Assyrian army. It was one of those miracles that you would not normally see. And shortly after that, so the Assyrians ruled everything except for Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, after they left, reestablished the area of Judah. But they pretty much lost the 10 tribes. They lost all the records of the descendants and the ancestors of Israel. But don't worry, because the Babylons would come behind. They would conquer the Assyrians. They would come into the land, and they would wipe out everything they'd Assyrians had wiped out, they would surround Jerusalem and destroy it. They'd destroy the temple that was there. This is before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. So the Babylonians took charge, but guess what happened to them a few hundred years later? The Persians came and gobbled them up. I almost had a slide I was going to show you with fish eating another fish, eating another fish. Maybe you've seen it before. That's what it was like. During this time that Persia is in charge, that's the setting for Easter. Esther. You knew it was bound to happen. I'm sure it won't be the only time. So, anyway, so much for history. Unique things about the book of Esther, and this is very fascinating to anybody, is that it never mentions God. It's the only book in the Bible that never, ever mentions God. It never mentions the promised land at all. There's no mention or concern for Jerusalem, which you normally would see. No option to return to Jerusalem, which would have been in the books just in front of Esther, would have been about that story. No mention of the temple. No mention of the laws of Moses, which were very embraced by the Jews. All that being said, we're going to see awesomely clear evidence of the sovereignty of God, where God works through everything. It's just an amazing thing. So which brings us now to our passage today, which is the first 2 chapters of Esther. King Xerxes of Persia. You got to remember to say Xerxes. And if you read another version, they might have another name, but we're going to use Xerxes. It's the translation we take part of. King Xerxes was having a grand party in his capital city. It lasted 180 days, or 6 months. Now, I know some of you have been to high school and you had some long parties we won't talk about, but 6 months is a long time to have a party. Evidently, King Xerxes liked having parties. Then right after that party was done, he had a banquet for everybody that served in the empire in the capital city of Susa. You can see it took a lot of work to get that photograph of Susa. Actually, you can go look on your map where Susa was. It's very interesting there too. That event lasted for a mere 7 days, which to me is an awful long party all by itself. And it was a display of incredible wealth. There was lots of eating and drinking, and King Xerxes, instructed his staff to give anybody whatever they want. More food, more drinks, it doesn't matter. Let it rock and roll. At the same time King Xerxes was having his party, his Queen Vashti, was having a party in another part of the palace, hosted for the women of the palace. Obviously, the drinks were flowing, and I can't help but think that they affected the king. And the king decided he wanted to show off his queen. So we start reading from verse 10. Thanks, Carter, for reading those first 9 verses or so. Let me read from Esther chapter 1, verse 10. On the 7th day of the feast, this is the smaller 7-day feast, when King Xerxes was in high spirit because of the wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who attended him, Mehuman, Bestha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abditha, I can't say them all. I've been practicing all week. Zethar, Carcass. That's the eunuchs that attended to him personally. And he asked them to bring Queen Vashti to him with a royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a beautiful woman, and I'm sure she was. For a king who was a king in one of the vast armies, I think I forgot to talk about that slide, it went from India all the way to Ethiopia. That's a lot of geography. That's an awful lot. It seemed a small request for the queen to come to his party. And he was in authority. He was in control of his realm, or at least he thought he was. But then plans don't always go the way you want them to go. starting to read from verse 12 of chapter 1. But when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. He immediately consulted his wise advisors, who knew all the Persian laws and custom, for he always asked their advice. Here's some more names. The names of these men were Karshina, Shether, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Maimukkan. We'll come back to Maimukkan in just a little while. 7 nobles of Persia in the former empire of Media. They met with the king regularly and held the highest position in his empire. You could say Queen Vashti was putting a strain on their relationship. But more to the point, the king really exploded. And a king with that kind of power isn't good to have on your bad side. He was very angry, extremely so. You could say he hit the ceiling on his palatial palace, because he did. One doesn't say no to a king like that without consequences. It's just going to happen. Verse 15 of chapter 1. What must be done to Queen Vashti? The king demanded, what penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders, properly sent through his eunuchs? Maimukkan answered for the king and his nobles. Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but every noble and citizen throughout your empire, meaning the guys. Maimukkan, one of the king's trusted counselors, gives the king his thoughts. And Esther, it's important to keep in mind the setting we're dealing with. We're at the highest level of government in the Persian Empire. It's really interesting to me that they have none of church rules. They had none of the Jewish rules. They're just a pagan people. And we're going to see God act within the confines of a pagan empire. Verse 17, Maimukkan goes on to say, women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti had refused to appear before the king. Before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Media will hear what the queen did, and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and anger. Worse things cannot happen. This is a horrible thing. So Maimukkan pointed out the cause and effect. And the news regarding the queen not obeying the king's orders, such disrespect will go across the empire. There'll be trouble with husbands and wives everywhere. He's almost implying that the whole empire will be in rebellion because of Queen Vashti. There'll be total chaos in the Persian Empire. Verse 19. I can't help but smile. It's a big deal out of something that isn't that big of a deal, but so if it pleases the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and the Medes. Medes. They cannot be revoked. It should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of the king throughout the king's vast empire. Husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. So the king's advisors, his wise guys we could call them, indeed had a plan to save the kingdom. They suggest that following their advice, their wisdom, is the proper reaction to what's happened, and matters will be dealt with. And the king considers what these guys have to say. So the matter is settled. Make it so, wise guys. Verse 21, the king and his nobles thought this made great sense. So he followed Maimukkan's counsel. He sent letters to all parts of the empire, to each province, in its script and language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of their own home and should say whatever he pleases. Now let's see if Carter read the beginning, which told you how many provinces are in the king's empire. Do you remember, Carter? It's right near the front. It's 127. Don't worry, I shouldn't put you on the spot. It was just too ripe to ignore. 127 provinces, just like the U.S. has 50 states. 127, that's a lot, and some of them were very, very big. So, the king is happy. But then the dust settles, and life goes on. There's a little space of time here. You ever hear of buyer's remorse? Maybe we should call it decision remorse. Well, I'm guessing there was some loneliness and some second thoughts on the king's part, because you can sense it in what he's about to say. But have no fear. The council of the seven are close by, looking to help out. So we've moved to chapter 2. We're in the first couple verses of chapter 2. So after Xerxes' anger has subsided, he began thinking of Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. And no, with the kings like this, you don't take back a decree. Once you make a decree, it's there. So his personal attendant suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Yes, kings can do that. It was going to be the opportunity of a lifetime for someone. Sounds like a made-for-TV show. Esther chapter 2, verse 3. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women into the royal harem at the fortress of Susa. Haggai, the king's eunuch, in charge of the harem, will see that they are given all the beauty treatments. After that, the young woman who most pleases the king will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put that plan in effect. A beauty pageant for Persia. I can just see the headlines now. It was all put in place, and word was sent out quickly to the 127 provinces. Beauty scouts were appointed and set out in every province to bring the most beautiful of the young women to the harem at the fortress of Susa. We soon find out about a Jewish guy named Mordecai. He actually shows up in our next verse, and he really is one of, if not one of the greatest heroes of this story. Reading from verse 5 of chapter 2 in Esther. At that time there was a Jewish man in the fortress of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, son of Or. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Shimei. His family had been among those who, with King Joachim of Judah, had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. You might remember that king's name. Not only is Mordecai one of the heroes of our story, but to give it even more context, to make it even more interesting, he's also Esther's closest relative. God uses relationships around you, sometimes to guide you, sometimes to inspire you. Sometimes they're used as bad reasons not to follow them. I've seen that happen often. But not only was Mordecai Esther's guardian, more than that. So it's his closest relative. He is her guardian. And more than that, he was her mentor. And she listened to him. She listened to him well. He was indeed the head of his household. And that's where she grew up. And it should be noted that Mordecai had extreme integrity. He really did. His yes was yes, and his no was no. And we're going to see that play out. Esther chapter 2, verse 7. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. As a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other young women, were brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Haggai's care. This is really important background. You have to understand what's going on here. And again, we're going to see God within this non-Christian, non-Jewish environment. God is going to act. We'll be talking more about that down the road real soon. This is all an important background to understand that God's not constrained by a country that just has churches. God is all over the globe, and he is acting. Esther chapter 2, verse 9. And Hegai was very impressed with Esther and treated her kindly. He quickly ordered a special menu for her and provided her with beauty treatments. He also assigned her 7 maids specially chosen from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maids to the best place in the harem. This is interesting. Esther had not told anyone of her nationality or her family background because Mordecai had directed her not to do so, and she followed what Mordecai said. And that day it would have been a little bit unusual for Hebrews, Jewish people, to keep it a secret. It would be unusual because Jews weren't persecuted. They were just part of the population. Like a kingdom like that brings a whole bunch of people together. That would not be dangerous. That's different than our day, where if you're a Jewish person, during the last century and even in this century, there's persecution that goes on. You think of Hitler and things of that nature. It's just horrifying to think about. So people under threat would keep it secret. But in her case, she really didn't have a reason to, except her father, her adopted father, told her not to tell anyone that she was Jewish. So verse 11, every day Mordecai would take a walk near the courtyard of the harem to find out about Esther and what was happening to her. We get a clue a little bit more about Mordecai, what he did for a living. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months of oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. I have to be honest with you. Ugh. I know it means a lot to a lot of people, but to a lot of us guys, not so much. When it was time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to take from the harem. It appears to me that Mordecai has a very high post at the capital. It's obvious he had free movement. You don't just casually go talk to the maidens in the harem unless you have a function, an ID pass snapped to your collar. I'm sure normal visitation was tightly gathered, and I just became interested in, so what was this guy's title? Mordecai. Was he like chief of staff, or was he like head bottle washer? He had to be something. We'll maybe find out a little bit later. Esther, chapter 2, verse 14. The evening she was taken to the king's private rooms, and the next morning she was brought to the second harem where the king's wives lived. There she would be under the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, in charge of the concubines. She would never go to the king unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. There had to be gobs and gobs of policies and procedures regulating Esther's life from that point on. I'm sure security was all over the palace, all over around the harem. And I was taken back as I thought to how women were being treated then. Really kind of like property. I'm sure God wouldn't honor that, but God works through all sorts of things. The Bible includes things. The Bible isn't giving permission to it, it's noting it as a matter of fact. You see, God was in a position, he's going to be saving the Jewish nation from total annihilation. The people were about to be destroyed. To explain Esther's connection to Mordecai, we're given additional details as we continue to learn more of their background, Esther and Mordecai. Esther was the daughter of a guy named Adbel, who was Mordecai's uncle. Mordecai had adopted his younger cousin Esther, so he was quite elderly than her. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Haggai the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested, and she was admired by everyone who saw her. Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter of the 7th year of his reign. I know there's a lot of data coming at you. Unusual in our day, a king with multiple wives and a harem with multiple concubines. Even as I've read about King David and King Solomon having concubines and things like that, it's hard for me to imagine what that world was like. It does help us to understand the setting where Esther lives. The Bible doesn't condone how women were treated back then, but they do speak of God's sovereignty in an unholy nation, how God protected his people. You're going to see some pretty exciting turns of events. God is often at work behind the scenes, and we don't have a clue. Things going on right now, here in this country, in our own town, around the world, in the war zone, in Asia. Esther chapter 2, verse 17. And the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. Well, that's quite a statement. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. To celebrate the occasion, he gave a great banquet, of course he did, in Esther's honor for all his nobles and officials, declaring a public holiday for the provinces and giving generous gifts to everyone. The king loved Esther, and he celebrated his relationship to his whole kingdom. He wanted the kingdom to know that this is the new queen. This is who is in charge of that realm. It appears when you're a king, you can make a holiday or celebration anytime you want. Actually, you can do a lot of things anytime you want. Verse 19, even after all the young women had been transferred to the second harem and Mordecai had become a palace official, Esther continued to keep her family background and nationality a secret. She was still following Mordecai's directions, just as she did when she lived in his home. Amid Esther becoming queen, Mordecai has been made some kind of palace official, indicating he was probably doing some job-related job in the palace before that. Now he's able to communicate and talk to Esther anytime he wants, frequently. Esther listened to him. Sometimes we have wise people around us and we don't listen too well. I've spent a lifetime learning to listen. And my past was made up of just waiting for my turn to talk. It's humbling to realize what you've done in your life, but it's good to pursue changing it. The book of Esther is full of twists and turns, and now we'll see Mordecai getting wind of a plot. It's not going to wait till next week. It's going to happen right now as we read about it. A plot to kill the king, the emperor, if you will, of a grand empire. I really like watching people who take in information and don't just emotionally react to it. They emotionally pop a cork and they just spew it out. They think about it. They pause and they take a moment. What do I do with this? In my case, I'm always asking God, what do I do with this news? How do I react to this? Verse 21 of chapter 2. One day as Mordecai was on duty at the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthana and Teresh, you might remember those names, probably not, who were guards at the door of the king's private quarters. They became angry at King Xerxes and plotted to assassinate him. You know, it can be really wonderful to be a king. Think of all the stuff, the wealth, But there's some real big downsides. Namely, you live in a fishbowl. Everybody knows your business. You have no personal business. Everybody knows everything about you. And given the scary nature of mankind, their default to evil, evil is natural in mankind. That wouldn't always be helpful to a king, would it? Mordecai gives the information to Esther to inform the king of the plot to kill him. Esther 2:22. But Mordecai heard about the plot and gave the information to Queen Esther. She then told the king about it and gave Mordecai credit for the report. When an investigation was made and Mordecai's story was found to be true, the two men were impaled on a sharpened pole. This was all recorded in the book of the history of King Xerxes' reign. Don't want to dwell on that too much, but it sounds pretty horrible to me. This part of the story giving us some of this background to Esther, to Mordecai, their heritage, their jobs, what they did. One thing we know about a palace, it has intrigue. And intrigue in this palace is going to go on and on. It will have no end. It's so interesting to me, a person that has studied the Bible, the canonization of the Bible. That means the checklist of what books could be in the Bible, how it got into our Bible, because it was canonized to be one of the 66 books of the Bible. It's a name where God is never mentioned in the whole Bible. It's the only book that does that. And yet a book in which we're learning how God purposely and intentionally was active, looking to preserve the well-being of his chosen people, those people that were a witness to his holy name for his sake. One thing we learn well, and if you don't remember anything from today, God is sovereign. God is active. You know, some people teach and preach that God created you and then he just sits up and watches it. That's not God. God is masterfully involved, yes, with his people, but with all lives on earth. Very intentional. God said, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Nothing takes him by surprise. But no, he's also personally involved with us. He looks to walk in the garden with us. He looks to talk with us. He's aware of everything that's going on. On rare occasions, I hear people say, I'm so bad. I've done horrible things in my life, and God would not want to listen to me. He would not want to walk with me. No, what I have is a little too unforgivable. God would never forgive me. Well, let me tell you, God is so great. He is greater than any sin you will ever have. He is greater than anything on this earth. Our God is our creator. He's our sustainer. He's our provider. He's our protector. And if you don't have a relationship with him, I need you to know you want one. You will see it play out in Esther in dramatic ways. It's a fairly short book. We're going to have the prayer team on this side of the room if you'd like to pray about knowing Jesus Christ. They'd love to talk to you. Or if you just want prayer, someone to pray for you or with you, they would love to do that too. Let me pray now. Father, this book of Esther is so unusual as I look at this pagan kingdom and how you do what you want, when you want. Lord, you are a great God. You are a sovereign God. You are a God that knows us inside out, from the smallest cell to the galaxies of the stars in the heavens. You know it all. By your very nature being God, you know all things. You are every place at the same time. We are in awe of you. Thank you for your love for us. In Jesus' name, amen.
All throughout my history, your faithfulness has walked beside me. The winter storms made way for spring. In every season, from where I'm standing, I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. Help me remember when I'm weak. Fear may come, but fear will leave. You lead my heart to victory. You are my strength, and you always will be. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. See the cross, the empty grave, the evidence is endless. All my sins rolled away because of you, oh Jesus. See the cross, the empty grave, the evidence is endless. All my sins rolled away because of you, oh Jesus. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life.
Sometimes in my life, I'm very humbled before such a great God, a God who loves us, a God who cares. And I think, why me? Why you? Let me tell you one thing. God is real, and God is sovereign. God will not be mocked. He will not be made fun of him. And someday every knee will bow and every tongue confess to the glory of God. Let me share the benediction. Father, thank you for this chance to be in community with people who love you, want to worship you. May you allow us to do that every day of our lives. Allow us to share it with our friends. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great week.